This is the MGTOW Infinium here with another Infinium training session. This Infinium training session is entitled Reverse Counterflow Logic. My brothers, as you walk along the MGTOW pathway, you will inevitably and invariably encounter pressure from the feminist plantation state, feminists, and women in general to engage or re-engage in your role as a slave. The aforementioned pressure upon you can come in many forms, ranging from overt to covert, and can find its way into any type of interaction with women. And given the increased pressures that women in general are facing in terms of getting men to deal with their near catastrophic issues like extreme debts because of useless college degrees, women have stepped up the pressure upon we men to again either engage or re-engage in our roles as slaves, leading to the reason why, in particular, MGTOW men should limit all interactions with women as much as possible in this hour. The aforementioned issue of women trying to rob we MGTOW men of our freedom is also the very reason why we must be aware of various tactics which are being used upon us to enslave us. As such, an insidious tactic called reverse counterflow logic is being used by women on an ever-increasing basis upon we men. On face value, reverse counterflow logic may appear to be similar to doublespeak. However, reverse counterflow logic goes well beyond the purpose of doublespeak. It should be noted that doublespeak primarily causes confusion, whereas reverse counterflow logic goes well beyond causing confusion, as it is designed to create a condition of compromise along with confusion. It is because of the condition of compromise created by reverse counterflow logic that the door opens to covert manipulation for a man who is subjected to this tactic and consequently unwittingly falls for this tactic. Specifically, for a MGTOW man who falls for this tactic, it will mean the end of his embracement of the philosophy itself and the very real possibility of returning to his role as a simp slave. Fundamentally, reverse counterflow logic can only work when there are two opposing poles and a middle position between the two opposing poles. When this tactic is employed, the objective is to first pull the targeted opposing pole to the middle position, which can also be construed as a position of compromise. The aforementioned is where the similarities to doublespeak come into play, because it is through the creation of a state of confusion that the targeted opposing pole is forced from his pole position to the middle position of compromise. Once the objective of moving the target from his pole to the middle position of compromise is accomplished, the next step is to move the target completely over to her pole, which was formerly in opposition to his pole. Or in other words, his fully agreeing with her formerly opposing pole in every possible way. Because her target is now at the middle position of compromise, a process of erosion which wears away boundaries or objections to things which would formerly be strictly enforced at his opposing pole begins. How this is done is through the use of agree with the reason positionally, but positionally, that's not the proper solution to the problem. Here, it is the forward flow of logical reasons of understanding the position and the reverse counterflow of logical reasons why that position is incorrect, working in tandem with the growing state of confusion which drives the erosion process. It should be noted that because of the state of confusion and the intensity involved in the use of a reverse counterflow logic tactic, that a condition of bouncing back and forth between the two opposing poles may occur. Here, the objective is still the same insomuch as the bouncing condition will eventually lead to the target becoming frustrated and eventually winding up in the middle position of compromise. Again, when the target winds up at the middle position of compromise, the erosion process will likely be much easier to accomplish due to exhaustion because of being bounced back and forth between the two opposing poles. It is when the target is in the middle position of compromise that the real danger of reverse counterflow logic becomes realized, because it is here that the target can, as a result of a successful erosion process, be easily manipulated and pulled into things which he would never be involved with had he remained at his pole position. In other words, the target being pulled into things which he would never be involved in is in actuality the target being pulled completely over to the formerly opposing pole of the woman. As a result, for instance, a formerly free MGTOW man can find himself being in the position of enslavement as a step dummy due to a well-executed reverse counterflow logic tactic wherein the objective of his enslavement was successfully achieved. It should be noted that only the target is forced to move from his opposing pole. And as well, it should be noted that there is never any movement from the pole which targeted the opposing pole. Simply put, it is the man who is always forced to move from his pole over to the woman's pole. As well, it is always the woman who remains at her pole at all times. For instance, a single mother who targeted a MGTOW man and successfully overcame his objections to being a step dummy through the use of a reverse counterflow logic tactic became possible only due to his being forced to move to her pole position. My brothers, the following is a video of a woman who is clearly making use of the reverse counterflow logic tactic in an effort to get men who have been caught up in paternity fraud situations to accept children as theirs based upon the bond they have created with those children. In the use of this content, I cite fair use policies. Here now is the content.
How can a man walk away from a child that he has been raising for 3, 5, 10, 15 years simply because the DNA test shows that he's not the biological father? Hear me out here. I'm not being insensitive. I know that his world has just been turned upside down. I know he feels betrayed. He's devastated. I empathize. I sympathize with his predicament. However, how is one able to walk away from a child that one has bonded with, loved, nurtured, poured blood and sweat into, simply because the DNA test shows that you're not the biological father? I understand getting rid of the wife or the girlfriend. The word I actually want to use starts with a W and rhymes with sure. Get rid of the W. But the children or the child, the innocent child, it is flummoxing to me. Now, I'm not a man, and I do not know how this impacts men. I also know that there's deep shame. But were I in that predicament, of course I would be devastated. I'd be hurt and betrayed. But then I'd let the children know, or the child know. You may not be my biological child, but you're still my child. I love you. You're my child in my heart. I've bonded with you. I've raised you. So nothing changes. Worry about, oh, then I have to continue paying I have to pay child support now that we're not together. So what? I'd pay the child support. Because you know what? Even though everything has changed, nothing should have changed, because it's still the child that I raised, bonded with, and loved. And in an attempt not to pay child support, one ends up cutting off one's nose to spite one's face, because you got to look at the big picture, the relationship with that child, the continued relationship, and the ability to go ahead and raise and nurture that child, because you already have that bonded relationship. But once again, because I'm not a man, I do not understand how anybody can walk away from a child. Story time. My husband had a boss about 20 years ago. This gentleman's son had some medical issues. And to make a long story short, he found out that his 19-year-old son was not his biological child. Needless to say, he was devastated. But you know what? He had raised this child for 19 years, was paying for college. This was his son, and he was not going to let him go. And my heart broke for him, but I was so proud of this man, because he did not walk away from his child. And I think at times some men might think walking away from the child is a way to punish the woman for her betrayal. But at the end of the day, the person you're hurting is the child. And I can't help but wonder, won't you be traumatized as a person walking away from someone that you've bonded with, that you've loved? For the man, isn't that traumatic? I mean, I really do not understand. I just cannot relate. And once again, I'm not a man. I'm sensitive to the hurt, to the pain, to the betrayal. But is it right to walk away from a child you've bonded with simply because the DNA test shows that you're not the biological father?
As you can see, my brothers, this example is a despicable use of the reverse counterflow logic tactic. As such, here are some major considerations when it comes to the dangers of reverse counterflow logic tactics. Number 1, the fallacy of the improper solution being the proper solution. In the example presented, the woman used the bonding process as a means to present a logical argument to any objection which will result in a man walking away from children who are not his due to a paternity fraud situation. Here again, it is the use of yes, you were hurt, but think of the kid's reverse counterflow logic, which is designed to create initial confusion, which is based upon the fallacy of obligation due to the parental bonding process. Furthermore, she coupled a how would you feel as a child shaming tactic with a logical argument of obligation due to the bonding process of a man unwittingly spending years of his life raising children who are not his. This is evidence in her indicating that it is not right for a man to walk away from children even when it is clear that paternity fraud has been committed upon him, and that the time spent with those children should be seen as a noble investment because it is a worthy cause on his part. Number 2, the fallacy of automatic loss of rights. The stance of understanding that the woman appeared to have can be construed as both hypocritical and despicable. This is because there was no consideration whatsoever of a man's rights or his emotional well-being when it concerns paternity fraud. Here, it should be understood that the do-it-for-the-kids fallacy is nothing more than a ploy for men who are victims of paternity fraud to suck up, shut up, and put up with a condition which is a devastating life event in every possible way. It is also the clowning of a man's mentality, nobility, and dignity insomuch that he has to look at paternity fraud as an investment rather than a despicable crime. Furthermore, it is the despicable use of children to rob a man of every aspect of his life while fully negating his rights in every way possible. It is also par for the course when it comes to the ability of women to not be held accountable for their actions when they commit crimes like paternity fraud. My brothers, to be clear, women who commit crimes like paternity fraud deserve to be punished to the full extent of the law. As well, men who are victims of paternity fraud should have the right to walk away from children who are not theirs without obligation and seek legal restitution based upon their determination rather than that of a judge. Number 3, the creation of a false perception. One of the main objectives of a reverse counterflow logic tactic is to create a false perception within the target's mind. It is this false perception that causes the target to eventually move from his pole position to the middle ground or compromise between the two opposing poles. When at the middle ground of compromise, the false perception, specifically the fault being laid at the feet of the target, becomes then an essential part of the erosion process which results in overall compromise. Once the state of full compromise is achieved, the target can be then easily pulled over to the opposing pole of the woman. It is important to understand that once the target is pulled over to the opposing pole of the woman, it is difficult at best to get free from that position. This is because the state of compromise and being at the opposing pole of the woman has opened the door to anything and everything happening to a man who is in this position. Like going from being a free MGTOW man to a man who is in an open marriage based upon the false perception that he has no right to be free from a marital situation which would result in the total loss of his freedom as well as his dignity. Number 4, a reverse counterflow logic tactic can be combined with other tactics. It should be considered that a reverse counterflow logic tactic can be used as a standalone tactic and also in conjunction with other tactics. As such, when a reverse counterflow logic tactic is used in combination with other tactics, the devastation created by such a combination can be unimaginable. For instance, women commonly use a tactic called sandboxing to control men. Sandboxing is basically a containment tactic wherein a man who is inside of a sandbox feels that he has power and control in the sandbox. In reality, it is the woman who has control over the sandbox and therefore the man within the sandbox. It is because of her control over the sandbox that a woman may employ the use of a reverse counterflow logic tactic as a means to maintain her control over the man who is confined within the sandbox. For a man who finds himself in this aforementioned condition, he may be oblivious to the great danger he is in due to his being hoodwinked by the use of a reverse counterflow logic tactic upon him. This is because at any time the woman can shrink or destroy the sandbox at will, leading to a shock and awe condition like job loss, business failure, etc. for the man involved. Whether it is in conjunction with another tactic like shit testing or standalone, the use of a reverse counterflow logic tactic can be construed as both mental and emotional abuse of you as a man. As such, the use of tactics like reverse counterflow logic, whether in tandem or standalone, represent attacks upon the very nature of who you are as a man, solely because these attacks are intended to destroy you and not edify you as a man. Becoming then the very reason why women who would use such tactics on men are doing so solely because of the wickedness and disrespect as well as hatred of men which exists in their hearts. My brothers, again, the reverse counterflow logic tactic is one of the many, many reasons why we MGTOW men should limit our interactions with women in every way possible. As well, it is important to understand that we must keep our wits about us when it comes to the overall determination of the feminist plantation state, feminists, and women in general to pull we MGTOW men off of our sure and solid foundation of our freedom and onto a position of compromise. Solely because the position of compromise will surely mean the end of our freedom due to the door being open to the oppression and whims of women's wills being executed over our lives, resulting in our enslavement. And finally, to also realize that there is now increased incentive on the part of the FPS, feminists, and women in general to stop the ever-shrinking slave pool by stopping we MGTOW men from walking in our freedom, which we rightfully deserve. This is the MGTOW Infinium, and this has been an Infinium training session. My MGTOW brothers, as always, stay safe, stay strong, stay on the MGTOW path, and remember, MGTOW is the liberation of men's minds. MGTOW cannot and will not be stopped.